What's up, fellas? In the second video of the day, we're going to be talking about the LA Clippers, a team that I have an interesting history with and a team that I think is worth talking about in this moment. In a Western Conference that is increasingly confusing and crowded at the top, whether I think everybody is kind of picking their side now, right? Either you're someone that thinks the Jazz are legit, or you're thinking, wow, Phoenix is really good, or maybe you really like this Clippers team, or you're thinking, hey, the Nuggets are on the up and up, this Aaron Gordon deal might be a game changer, or you're someone that's like, hey, by the way, the Lakers are the defending champs. If they get healthy, they're better than everybody. There's a lot of conversations being had about the top of the West, and I think the Clippers are a team that need to be talked about within that conversation, and that's what we're going to be talking about in the second video of the day. But really quickly, before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing to the channel. I upload twice a day, every single day. It's the most consistent NBA content on YouTube, so as I said, consider subscribing. And if you're new here, by the way, what's up? My name is Tucker. You can also leave a like rating on the videos as well, and you can check me out at various socials and a Linktree link down in the description below. With those things said, let's talk about the LA Clippers. So why do I want to talk about the Clippers? What is new with the Clippers? We know a lot of things about this group. Why are we bothering talking about them? Well, they're playing incredibly well. They're 11-2 in their last 13 games. Paul George has been playing really, really well, especially from an outside shooting standpoint over the last handful of games. And just overall, the Clippers, I think, are having a better season than most people are realizing. And there's this default about the Clippers that, there's this default feeling where it's like they don't matter. They don't matter. They're irrelevant. They're gonna mess it up in the playoffs. And I'm not saying you're wrong about that, by the way, if that's your mindset. But I just think that sometimes we take that too far to the point where we just don't even mention them. And they're a team worth mentioning. They're having a really good season. And the question here that's posed is, should you believe in them? Should we be talking about the Clippers? Should we believe in them as a real threat in the West? Well, let's make arguments on both sides here. So for one thing, as we kind of evaluate this group, there are some issues, right? And it's similar to what we had last year with this group, where you don't really know, like, you understand the pieces and where they are individually. You understand Kawhi, you understand Paul George, you understand Marcus Morris, you understand Serge Ibaka, you understand, all the different individual pieces, but how they all fit together doesn't make a ton of sense. And what that leads to is like, okay, when it comes down to it, when you're down 6 with 8 minutes to go in the fourth quarter of a playoff game, who are the 5 guys you're putting on the floor? Every championship team needs to know who that is. I don't think the Clippers know who that is. And I think that was the case last year as well, amongst many, many issues with that Clippers team last year, specifically in the bubble. So I think there's 4 guys that it's pretty clear are going to be on the floor at the end of the game, assuming they're not in foul trouble. It's Ibaka, it's Kawhi, it's Paul George, and it's Marcus Morris. And who that 5th guy is still pretty much a mystery to me. And I think it was a mystery last year as well, what their closing group was going to be. It was a problem that I had with them throughout the year, and I looked past it and still thought that they were going to win the title, but it was a significant issue. And it's been a bit of a revolving door. And my big issue kind of when I watch this team is from night to night, like, there's a lot of Luke Kennard. There's a lot of Reggie Jackson, Nick Batum, Terrence Mann, who actually has been pretty good for him lately. And I think as you look around at other contenders, specifically in the West, there aren't as many like really weird question marks about their 5-man unit as there are in LA. And the 4 guys that I mentioned have been really good for them, but finding out who that 5th guy is going to be a problem. And again, it just kind of speaks to a bit of a lack of identity at times that I think has been one of the bigger flaws of this LA team in the past. And I think they thought that Kennard was going to be that guy. I think they recognized the need for a guy in the backcourt that can space and maybe do a few things on the ball. And he's had some good games within this 13-game stretch, but then he's been wildly inconsistent where he plays like 1 minute or 3 minutes or just, not really have done anything with his time on the floor. Reggie Jackson is someone I do not want to be relying on at this point. Obviously, Patrick Beverley is going to be out with an injury. They traded away Lou Will. Like I said, Terrence Mann has been an interesting little wrinkle here as of late, but I don't know if you feel super, super confident about him in a playoff series at this point. And then Nick Batum, again, I don't know that if you tell someone, hey, we feel really good about 4 guys, and our 5th guy is going to be Nick Batum. I don't know if anybody's going to hear that and be like, okay, we're going to win the title. You know what I mean? So like that would definitely be an issue for me. But you can talk about the negatives. You can talk about, I don't know if I love Ty Lue as a coach. I don't know who their 5-man unit is. But here's the thing that I would come back to about the Clippers and about why I would potentially be nervous about them if I was a fan of one of the top teams in the West. And it's the biggest reason that I felt so confident about them last year. And I think it's something that people are continually forgetting about, which is odd because it's pretty recent. And that's the Kawhi Leonard of all this, right? Now, are there times where Kawhi maybe looks a little bit hobbled, maybe doesn't look super healthy, maybe that makes you nervous? There were, even at the end of that Toronto run, there were times where Kawhi looked like he was about 80, 85%. But what I would continue to come back to is in 2019, we saw this guy on a team that, certainly had talent around them, but I think you could argue this Clippers team has more talent overall. Maybe it's not spread out as well. But we saw this guy not carry a team to a title, but, be the only superstar on that roster and lead a team to a title, albeit in a bit of an odd postseason. But I still would point to that, and I would still say if there's a guy that you feel really confident about leading a team on a great postseason run, I think Kawhi is still near the top of that list, even if maybe your opinion of him has gone down a little bit as a result of the Clipper stuff from last postseason, as well as maybe potentially some health stuff. But I still think that if you're looking for some of the main positives about this Clippers group, Kawhi's history of the postseason still has to be one of those main positives. And I think maybe the biggest point of this whole argument about should you believe in the Clippers or not is something that we're not even going to know about until we really get into the postseason. And that is how much of the issues that they had last year in the postseason had to do with the environment they were in. It has been very, very well documented that the Clippers wanted zero part of the bubble. Basically, from the minute they got there, and they didn't throw the series, right? But they weren't as motivated necessarily to win and continue to stay in the bubble than they would have been in a regular postseason. And you can fault them for that from a competitive standpoint. And you can say, hey, I know it was a tough situation, but there were other teams that were more willing to deal with that situation than you guys were, and they were more well equipped to deal with it. And quite simply, you had a good shot to win the title last year, and you arguably threw it away. And I'm not here to speak negatively on that, because obviously the bubble was a tough scenario, and I think every player at this point has spoken out and said, man, the bubble was like a really difficult thing to deal with at times. But when you're relating that directly to this year's team and the difference between that postseason and this postseason, I think it's pretty clear that could be a determining factor. Like just wanting to be there and not being in the bubble and having a regular postseason. Maybe this Clippers team last year was actually going to be a real true threat. And the thing over anything else that threw a wrench into their plans was the bubble. Now, that's only a piece of the argument, and I think it's pretty easy to counter that and say, well, it probably had more to do with the roster, probably had more to do with the fact they didn't have a five-man unit they liked at the end of games, probably had more to do with the fact that Montrezl Harrell couldn't stay on the floor defensively, Lou Williams was awful, and just critical pieces of their team in the regular season just weren't as good in the postseason, and they just didn't bring it when they needed to, and they blew a 3-1 lead. Absolutely. That is probably a better argument than, oh, well, they didn't like being in the bubble. But I do think you have to bring all these things into consideration. So what I land on ultimately with this Clippers team is there are teams that I believe in more. I honestly believe more in the Suns right now than I do the Clippers. And I know that historically, I guess historically isn't the right word, but over the last couple of years, that seems like an odd statement, right? But I think the Suns are really, really good. I believe in the Lakers more than I do in the Clippers. I believe in the Jazz more than I do the Clippers. And I think arguably I believe in the Nuggets more than I do in the Clippers. But if you fast forward to the conference finals and you want to tell me that the Clippers are there, I'm not going to tell you that's impossible. I'm not going to be like, wow, that's really surprising. How did that happen? I just think that this is such a tough, competitive West within the top 5 or 6 here that anything can happen. And in a postseason outside of the bubble where, Kawhi and Paul George are playing really, really well, I think they're going to have a shot in any series that they play in either conference. And that means, to me, they're a true contender. And it also means that, to a certain extent, yeah, you should believe in this Clippers team. And I know that there's a possibility that they're just cursed and it's just not going to happen for them, or that Paul George doesn't have what it takes in playoffs, or the Kawhi run in Toronto was a fluke, or something along those lines. But I'm not willing to bet against them, is what I would say. I think from a talent perspective, there's still, not very many duos better than Kawhi and Paul George across the league. And even though they do have some structural issues in terms of who their five-man unit is, some of the defensive stuff doesn't always look great at times. That's the case with pretty much, every team's going to have flaws. You're not looking for something perfect here. And I think if for example, you just swapped everything about these two teams and instead it was the Mavericks instead of the Clippers, you'd be looking at them differently. And I think kind of all the negative connotations that comes with, oh, they're the Clippers, and then obviously this roster or similar roster, what happened to them in the postseason last year, just kind of brings them down and lowers the threshold in which, I guess, raises the threshold in which we kind of feel like we need to talk about them. They're playing really well. 11-2 in the last 13 is not easy, especially in this season where everything can be so weird and so crazy. And I'm just saying, take them serious. Take a look at them. Don't ignore them, because if you if you think it's impossible for the Clippers to get to the conference finals, I'd probably tell you you're crazy. I would not be surprised at all. But if you want to tell me they lose in the first round, I wouldn't be surprised either. So, yeah. That's going to be the end of the second video of the day, and I thank you guys very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. You can leave a like rating on the video as well if you enjoyed it. And, yeah, hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.